The WCB Podcast, your source for all things Chicago Blackhawks and everything hockey. With your host, Jarom and Tanner. Let's do it. Jarom and Tanner.
All right, it's another edition of the WCB Podcast. It's Jarom, it's Tanner. What's up, bud?
I'm good, I guess. I was going to say nothing, but I'm good. It's fine.
Nothing?
Nothing.
Special edition of the WCB Podcast. We were lucky enough to have Blackhawk Beat Writer Ben Pope on the show. We talked to him a little bit about, him getting into journalism and what got him into writing for the Hawks. And then we picked his brains a little bit about the upcoming draft and the off season, and got some good stuff. It was a really awesome interview, and I look behind the curtain a little bit.
Yeah, it was great. I'm a huge fan of being able to kind of chat with somebody that has that little bit of an inside look into the team, because there's not many guys that you can talk to that are currently hanging out with the players. The guys that we've had on the show have been past guys, right? So getting somebody that knows the guys on the team a little bit more intimately, for this season and the upcoming season and everything, was really cool.
Yeah, it was awesome. And definitely, hopefully we'll get him on the show more often in the future, because it was worth the time and definitely worth the listen. So enjoy this one. So we'll keep it nice and short. We'll get right to that interview. But first, just an update on the Stanley Cup final. Tanner was wrong.
I was fucking so close to being right though. So now you're up. So
I'm up.
You said 5
tonight. Hopefully I will be right. And hopefully Bob does get Conn Smythe, which people saying that game, he blew it, his chance for Conn Smythe. I think that's ridiculous. I mean, one bad game. The dude's played every single game this postseason. It's the first time he got pulled from a game. Pump the brakes.
Okay, it is tomorrow. NHL.com has the weirdest layout. I thought it was going to be on the 21st. It's on the 18th. I was like, oh my god.
I think 21st might be.
That's this game 6.
Game 6, yeah.
If necessary. But yeah.
Yeah.
Florida, way to go.
Yeah, Florida, way to go. Or Florida.
I love the fact that people are like, oh, Edmonton's never lost. Ever after they lost 3 in a row, they go on a huge win streak, and it's look at those teams that they beat. They're not the Florida fucking Panthers, dude.
It's an interesting stat. It's the only reason why I sent it, because it's hey, weirder things have happened in the Stanley Cup playoffs. So you never know. But I don't think if Florida doesn't close it out tonight, does that make it a little oh no, or
a little bit? I feel like I don't know. If they get blown out, I'm gonna be like, oh shit.
Yeah.
If they get blown out again, it's gonna be an oh shit situation, especially since you kind of have that feeling oh, now they're getting the bounces. Now they're going to be unstoppable. Shit, 2 games is going to be nothing. And then I don't know. It's kind of crazy that McDavid set the playoff assist record too.
That's what I was going to bring up. When did that happen? Because I feel like he has just been a non-factor as
I honestly didn't even know he had close to 30 plus assists, and then they're like, "Oh, he tied Wayne Gretzky," and you're like, "Oh, what?"
I had no idea. Yeah, I'm like, oh man, McDavid's he's washed, man. He doesn't belong. He can't handle the big stage. Oh no, he's just breaking Wayne Gretzky assist record in the playoffs.
Yeah,
okay.
I feel like they just made that shit up.
Right.
I don't remember him getting 30 assists in the previous 3 rounds.
Does that make it easier to give him the Conn Smythe if the Oilers lose, or do you think it's still hard to give it to him?
I think that you really only ever give it to a goalie if your team loses.
There's been 4 times, and one has been a defenseman, I think, or a forward.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's usually a goalie's just standing on his head, playing incredible, and his team is just
yeah. So, all right. Well, we'll wrap this up, send it over to the interview with Ben Pope. Once you're done with this, make sure you are subscribed to our podcast feed, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and then the YouTube channel where you can watch the interview. And we will we'll see you next week.
All right. Love you, boys. Enjoy.
All right, so now we are joined today by Chicago Blackhawks beat writer for the Chicago Sun-Times, Ben Pope. Ben, thank you so much for joining the show today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Yeah, we're big fans of your work. You know, you're my go-to whenever I got to double check some stuff and get some research done. Your Twitter account's my first one to go to. So happy to have you here. Yeah, it's Tanner.
Yeah, I was just curious, like, what you started in journalism and like how that lead to like ending up with the Hawks.
Oh man, well, this might take a little bit too long to explain in depth, but I mean, so I grew up in Raleigh. I was a big Canes fan growing up, and when I was pretty young, honestly, around like 12, 13 years old, I like started, having an interest in sports journalism as a future career and started blogging and just kind of, wading into it. Didn't really know what I was doing. Obviously, I was just a kid, but did that up through high school. And by that point, kind of realized it was definitely the path I wanted to go down. So I went to Northwestern for journalism and, was covering Northwestern sports, football, and basketball. So been still kind of blogging on the side about hockey. Obviously, there's no, hockey, varsity hockey there, but it's always been the sport I, was most interested in. And ended up interning at the Sun-Times my senior year covering high school basketball. And just right as my internship was ending, I was actually, literally driving home to Raleigh to kind of, search for a job. I was going right through Indianapolis and got a call that a couple people had moved around and they were interested in bringing me on the Blackhawks beat. This was in 2019. So just some luck. And also the fact that hockey maybe is a little bit more of a niche sport than some, and they'd had a little bit of difficulty finding someone with a real passion for that and knew that the intern was into that. So just kind of got lucky with that. But I guess it's been over 5 years now. So feels like a long time ago. But that's kind of the short version of how I ended up in this position.
Did you ever get a chance to play hockey growing up, or was it just something that you followed?
Honestly, no, I never did play hockey. I'm not really the most athletic person. I always loved sports, but just wasn't blessed with much talent. I played soccer a little bit, just recreationally, and swimming, but it was never really something that I, considered pursuing or anything like that. And honestly, hockey is not really a big thing, especially 20 years ago in North Carolina. So actually, 2 summers ago, I took some skating lessons because I figured I ought to at least know how to skate if I'm a hockey reporter. But I've never played a single game of hockey in my life. So it's kind of all just been from watching it and talking to people and learning through it that way. So I do not have that perspective of being on the ice before.
That's awesome. So you cover the Hawks. You travel with the team obviously a lot. Who would you say you're around more frequently? Are you like management, the players, the coaches? Like who do you really spend your time talking with?
Definitely the players most of all, because in season, every single day that they have a team activity, so that's a game or practice, which is 90% of the days, they're required by the league to have an open locker room. So I and all the other reporters are able to just go in there and kind of chat with anybody in there. And I'm writing every single day during the season, so there's typically quite a lot to get to if I want to, work on that day's story and also stockpile some stuff for the next few days. So I'm typically talking to at least 2 or 3 players every day, sometimes more. And then if it's a game day where there's a morning skate and a post game, often 6 or 7 because there's 2 different availability sessions. And then obviously we also talk to Luke Richardson on a daily basis as well after that player availability. So those are in terms of journalistic perspective, the people I'm primarily talking to. Occasionally talking to the assistant coaches as well. Occasionally talking to Kyle Davidson and other people in the front office, but there's not as regular access to them as with the players who I've talked to, dozens of times each throughout the course of the year.
Do you find that there's like a specific set of players that tend to like give you a little bit more info than others that are a little bit more open?
Yeah, you definitely get to know the guys on a personal level to some extent and figure out which ones are a little bit more chatty, which ones are quieter, which ones are, are more open with the media, which ones, are a little bit more skeptical of revealing anything, and kind of even figure out which guys to go to for certain topics. But yeah, there's definitely guys that are just in general the go-tos. Foligno, obviously, no surprise there, and Dickinson as well. Even last season before his breakout this year, Dickinson was always a guy I would go to. He's just truly a genius. Like, I think if he wasn't playing hockey, he'd be some sort of high level person in another field, because he's just, the level of depth in which he analyzes things is incredible. So he's always great to get his perspective. And there's honestly a lot of good talkers in this team the past few years. It's been, one of the worst teams in the league in terms of on ice performance, but in terms of interview skills, I'd say probably one of the best. So that's been helpful in terms of covering the team, just to, even though there's not been a lot of, positive stuff to write about. And it is helpful to have a bunch of guys who are good talkers and are interesting. And Richardson falls in that boat too, definitely among NHL coaches, one of the most willing to really go into the details and one of the most friendly. So yeah, that's been really great. I mean, among the defensemen, Murphy's always been good. I really enjoyed talking to Vlasic this year. He's really down to earth guy. He has celiac disease, and it was really interesting talking to him about that and kind of how he navigates that with all their catered meals and everything. And that's some of my favorite stuff to talk about with these players, is not just the hockey, because that kind of gets monotonous, especially when the team is struggling, but their own individual quirks and kind of off ice interests and that sort of thing. So whenever a player is willing to open up about that, I always find that really interesting to talk to.
Yeah, that's always like a fun part of it, because I feel hockey players have, the stereotype of being, pucks in deep and, team effort kind of responses like that. So it's like when you're able to find the human side of the players and all that. And I do notice that a lot with the Hawks guys, not only from your pieces, but the other cover writers as well. I just got to ask you, put you on the spot now. Who do you think is the best player, like best soundbite you've gotten from like through your time so far in Chicago? Who's your number one?
Oh man, throughout the whole time, I mean, Dickinson really does have a good case for it. There's been so many players, like, they've had such incredible turnover over these 5 years that it's kind of hard to think back to like 2019-20 and that time period who the best guys from that team were. But even Mrazek, I feel like, is in a totally different way. Like, it's not like he's giving, really interesting analytical quotes the way Dickinson is, but he's just such a kind of goofy, happy-go-lucky guy, and always just brings a smile to your face when you're dealing with him. So in a totally different way, he's also been awesome to deal with. But kind of all of the goalies really are usually pretty interesting. Going back to Leonard, he was a character, and Kevin Lankinen was a really funny, nice guy. Crawford a little bit more reserved, particularly the last few years, the time that I was covering him. But generally with the goalies, you're always, Colin Delia was pretty fascinating and quirky too. So they're always a good bet to have something interesting for you.
Did you get any like good Fleury stories or anything? Like behind the scenes, I know he's like a big prankster. I don't know if he did anything like that.
I've seen those videos more recently. I don't know if he did any like big pranks. That was the 2021-22 season when there was still a bit of COVID restrictions going on. So like the 21 season, the shortened one, it was all on Zoom. So we barely got to know those guys like Matthias Janmark, Nikita Zadorov, who were only there that year. And it's kind of wild to like see Janmark in the Cup final and think about how I technically covered him, but never met him in person a single time. And then the 21-22 season, we were back in person, but it was all in more press conference settings rather than just, individually talking to them. So I never really got to talk to Fleury that much, just, as a person to person, as more in press conferences. But he certainly was always good to deal with and seemed like a funny guy. I wish I had gotten more time with him.
So you were just actually part, in Buffalo for the combine. So let's just get right into that. Number two, the big question has been the big debate since, the Hawks lost out on the draft. I guess you could say lost on the draft lottery, unless Mike Rear decides to just shock the world. Celebrini is off the board. Who do you feel is the right pick right now, or what the vibe is right now at number 2?
I mean, the thing is, it's hard for me to say like who I think is the right pick because I'm not really watching these guys throughout the year. Like I'm focused on the NHL team and trying to keep up with the prospects in the system, which is hard enough as is. So I'm not really able to spend a lot of time scouting the draft prospects coming up the way, obviously the team scouts are and the way people who, focus their coverage on that specifically are. And I try to catch up after the season ends and after we figure out after the draft lottery where they'll be picking. But I can't claim to really know nearly as much as some people do about them. And the second thing is, it's just such an inexact science. Like even these guys who scout all year long, they still get it wrong all of the time. Because it's just, I mean, you're dealing with 17, 18-year-olds who aren't playing against NHL competition, and you're trying to figure out 3 years, 6 years down the road what they're going to be like. You're just never going to have a 100% success rate. And whenever I see fans or even experts who are so decisive or conclusive about like Demidov is the pick or Levchnov is the pick, and like there's no doubt that he is going to be the better player, I just kind of laugh at that because I don't think it's possible to know that with certainty, no matter how informed you are. And a lot of fans are probably not that informed and still jumping to that conclusion. So I don't really know if I can say who I think is going to be better. They both seem to have a lot of promise, and they both have a lot of talent. They both have a couple red flags as well. And I can see why it's been such a tough decision for the team because it does seem to be pretty much a dead heat. It's hard for me to say really who I think would be better myself. In terms of what the team does, if I had to guess, I would probably guess Levchnov, but certainly with no more than 60% certainty, because I think if anything, the only real differentiating factor is just the fact that he's in North America. They've been able to talk to him and see him in person all year long, work with him. They got to go out to dinner with him at the combine. They got to see his testing results. He knows English, so he's able to communicate better. I know they're going to meet with Demidov and probably go out to dinner with him this week as well, but I assume that's going to be with a translator. I don't think his English is very strong. So just in terms of access, I could see that potentially making them lean Levchnov. But in terms of the players themselves, I think it's really hard to differentiate which one is better, even though they're very different players. So it's kind of hard to really say. And that's kind of the interesting part of it. This is the first time since really 2019 where we've been able to have such a concrete debate over players, because 2020 with a 17th pick, there's just way too many possibilities to narrow it down when they ended up picking Reichel. And then 2021, that was the year they didn't have any picks going in, or that was 2022.
2022, yeah.
Who was that?
Well, wait, hold on. Because let me pull it up real quick too, because I'm getting mixed up. Because
I'm getting mixed up too.
Doc was
2019.
2019, that's right.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad you brought that one up too, because I remember right before that draft, like there's a lot of talk about it being like Byram or Dylan Cousins or even like Alex Turcotte, and then all of a sudden they went with Kirby Dach. Like, is there any kind of inclination that you get that it could be someone other than Levchnov or Demidov at all?
I haven't really gotten any sense of that possibility. It seems pretty clear that it'll be one of those two. I mean, you can never rule anything out. There have been plenty of big surprises before. I remember 2 years ago when Montreal took Slavkovsky. It was in Montreal for that, and just the gasp in the building because it was such a surprise over Shane Wright, that I still remember that feeling, just the other shock of 18,000 people simultaneously. So you can never rule anything out, but I would be very, very, very surprised if it was anyone other than those two.
The 21 was when they traded for Seth Jones and got Nolan Allen at 32. And then 2022 is when they traded away DeBrincat and got Korchinski, traded away Doc and got Nazar.
The 2022 draft was memorable. I was blanking on 2021, and that's because that was also a remote draft.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't have been there in person.
I always end up forgetting, but like remembering way after the fact that like Sam Renzel was also somebody they acquired in that first round for like getting Peter Mrazek in too, which is just incredible.
Yeah, I think at the time people were kind of almost critical that they only moved up 13 slots or something like that by taking on Mrazek. It was a early second that they moved up to get that late first from Toronto. But the way Mrazek has played, it definitely looks a lot better in retrospect. It worked out very well on all fronts.
Yeah, Mrazek this season for sure looks like somebody that Toronto could have definitely used going into the playoffs. But yeah, he's had like quite a resurgence, like definitely this season, and just players that like maybe wouldn't have gotten the chance, like Jason Dickinson or Nick Foligno, probably had like much better years this year. I think. I don't know if you kind of agree with that too, but it's nice that I think the way that the Hawks are kind of built is a lot of guys get that time to kind of show if they can, like, take the reins and lead the team. And you've kind of seen that with those two guys, at least. Do you have,
for sure. I mean, you're looking back on that Dickinson trade, that looks like maybe one of the smartest trades by any GM over the past several years. Certainly not as influential as some, as like Florida getting Kachuk or anything like that. But to get a second round pick and then get a guy who was legitimately like a low-key Selke trophy caliber player this year.
Yeah, definitely.
Pretty remarkable work.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. Some of the small moves that Davidson has made, that just you kind of see them coming to fruition a little bit this season. Hopefully next season it kind of keeps building. Kind of talking about like going into next season though too. Do you have any any thoughts or anything on like what the Hawks might do with their current roster, with like bringing guys back or letting guys go?
I think they're going to let a lot of these free agents walk, and that's not too surprising. A lot of these were kind of replacement level placeholders. Obviously, they wanted to get Reichel and Vlasic figured out as soon as possible, and they already did that. We saw, Sanford coming back just kind of on a two-way deal, and I think we could see a couple other maybe depth guys come back. I think Joey Anderson probably has a good shot at getting re-signed, and maybe they'll take a look at one of the, category of Radish, Entwistle, Reese Johnson. Maybe one of those guys comes back just without, a guaranteed roster spot, but just if they're willing to take kind of a league minimum deal and be a depth guy. But I don't think there's going to be a ton more re-signings out of this current group. We heard Davidson at the end of the season say that he feels like it's time to start taking steps forward. And I don't think they're going to be a playoff contender by any means next year, but the main way he wants to do that is just by bringing in more depth and just having a more full roster where you're not having guys kind of playing above their pay grade, put into roles that they're not really qualified for. And it just kind of creates a trickle down effect throughout the roster where you're just not getting what you need from every position. So I think they're going to try to bring in more depth, bring in more NHL caliber players and flush it out that way, because they're able to do that without making super long-term contract commitments and sacrificing their cap flexibility, which seems to be still maybe the number one priority right now. But I think in terms of the free agents, we're going to see quite a bit of turnover among those lower level guys.
Any chance you think Steven Stamkos comes over if he's not in Tampa still? That'd be great. What a mentor for Bedard that would be.
I'm sure they'll reach out to him. But I don't really know why he would want to do that at this point. But
he's got his cups. He's fine.
It's true. Yeah, I mean, if he's really willing to just go after money, I think they will certainly be offering that. I think it's really going to come down to, with the free agents, just kind of asking pretty much all of them, like, hey, are you interested in a 2-year deal? We'll pay you way more than market value if you're willing to play on a non-contender for 2 years and then hit free agency again in 2026. And any guys who are interested in that, I think they're willing to consider it. I don't think they're going to go into this saying like, oh, we want these specific players. It's going to be more, we want better players and we want to get them on 2-year contracts. So who among the free agent class is interested in that? And then we'll work with you. I've seen the Gensel rumors, and asking Kyle about that in Buffalo a couple weeks ago, he did not really shoot it down, certainly not in the way that he decisively did with asking about Patrick Kane. So that was interesting, that they are shooting that high. I mean, maybe arguably the best free agent in the entire class, and I think it's not impossible to make a long-term contract. That's certainly what what Gensel will be looking for, I would imagine. And I think if they feel like the price is right, they would be willing to maybe give out one of those contracts, but they're going to be really reluctant to do so. I think they're going to be trying everything they can to keep these contracts at 2 years in most, if not all cases.
Yeah, just to kind of keep it in line with like whenever Bedard needs his new deal, especially since him and Korchinski and Nazar now are all going to be up at the same time.
Yeah. That summer seems like it's going to be the real major dramatic turning point in what they're trying to do, and they don't want to tie themselves up in any way beyond that point.
Definitely. And then there's a couple players out there that can be had via trade. Patrick Laine has been thrown out there. Martin Necas in Carolina. Hawks need to spend just under $10 million to get to the cap floor at least. And I mean, for the right price, I mean, do you think there is any benefit in those options? Has there been any like mumblings that, hey, let's explore this to see what they're looking for in return?
I'm sure they've been looking at it too, and again, I don't think they're really in any position to be choosy right now. I think they're going to try to find the best deal available, whether that's free agents or a trade. And I think it's just going to be more of a matter of like, what are those teams looking for in return, and do the Hawks have that? Because I think there's been some rumors that Carolina wants another Nate-like player in return, kind of an established NHL player with upside to become even better. And I don't know if the Hawks really have anyone that fits that bill. What they do have is a ton of draft picks. Now they've put in a lot of work to accumulate these picks, and it's not like they're a cup contender that's going to throw around a first round pick just to get a guy for 1 year to make a push for it. That's obviously not the situation either. But we saw in that trade with the Islanders to move up from 20 to 18 that they do feel like they have so many picks that some of those second and third rounders are pretty expendable. So if they're able to get a guy with kind of a package of that sort of stuff, I think they would be pretty interested in that. It's just going to be tougher in terms of, I don't think they're going to want to give up first round picks, and they also don't really have a lot of very valuable established NHL players that they'd be willing to part with, which is one reason I think they're going to be a lot more interested in the free agent market than the trade market. There's also, it's not a super, loaded free agent class, but it is a pretty deep one. Like there's a lot of guys that are solid players, even though there aren't a lot of stars. Some of those guys I'm sure will re-sign in the next couple of weeks and will end up making it to July 1st. But I feel like just the free agent market makes more sense at this point. But I'm sure they will look at the trades, and I wouldn't be surprised if one or two happen. I think they're going to try to be pretty active with that in general.
Yeah, I think fans got to kind of like stop looking at the Gensels type of players and start looking at like, and it's not a shot at these guys, but I think like the Domies, the Teravainens, like stuff like that. And like a couple years ago when those guys all came in initially, and like the Folignos last year and all that, I think that's more on par for what this rebuild is. And it's like, that's why I always said, I was like, damn, why do you have to say that they're ready to take the next step? Because that got everybody's like, oh my God, we're going to start winning and all this and this. And it's like, no, the plan is not to be bottom three. It's let's get a little bit closer and let's not, be the laughing stock. But it's like, it's still going to be probably safe to say, probably Bedard's first deal up around that time period until this team really starts adding and trying to compete for a playoff spot.
Yeah, I would think so. Kind of the way I've been thinking about it, and this is just my own idea. No one from the team has, kind of presented this timeline, but I feel like kind of the best case but reasonable scenario is that they improve by maybe 8 wins or so per year. Like they won 23 games this year. If they get to 30 or 31 next year, I feel like that is a very sizable amount of improvement that they can be happy with. Then in 2025, 26, get to maybe 37, 38 wins, kind of maybe make a little bit of noise in the bubble. I wouldn't expect them to be a playoff team that year, but just be in that mix. I think that would be a win as well. And then in 2026, 27, as you're saying, in the first year of Bedard's second deal, that's when they probably want to make that jump up to the mid 40 wins and ideally be a playoff team. So I feel like that's kind of the best case trajectory we can really think of, barring some, amazing 2017 Avalanche level improvement. Where that's kind of the timeline. So when he's saying take the next step, I mean, an 8-win improvement is a lot in the NHL. That's certainly the next step, but you're still 10 games below 500, even if you do that. So yeah, it's just going to take some more patience. But I think the idea is that if you can see that significant amount of improvement each year, that fans will stay bought in with this process and it won't get too impatient or anything like that.
Yeah. I was going to just go back a little bit to when you were talking about making the trade with from 20 to 18. Did you have any kind of insight on like why they decided to move those 3 picks just to move up the 2 spots and move up the 4 spots? Is there somebody that they're really looking for that they don't think is going to be there at 20 that they might be able to take at 18? Or do you think it's going to be like a part of a bigger move to something else?
That was like a draft day trade. That was kind of,
yeah, it was so weird, just in the middle of nowhere.
It was definitely perplexing. I was surprised initially too by it. Asking Kyle about that in Buffalo, they've built out their whole internal model in terms of analytics and player evaluation, pick values, everything like that. And Kyle's argument was that trade in their internal model was just a positive value net gain. In the public models, it was not a positive value gain. I think the Puckpedia one said that they would have had to also get, a 5th round pick for it to be an even value. And that makes sense to me. So I asked Kyle, what accounts for that big difference between the public pick values and your internal pick values? And he said that there was something that they're aware of that accounts for that difference. He just doesn't want to share what that is. So I'm a little skeptical still that there wasn't some more to it. I don't think that was a precursor to another trade to move up, because it just seems like weird timing to do that. Like, you'd think if it was a precursor, we probably would have seen it by now, since it's been a few weeks. And I know like that Devils 10th pick and the Sabres 11th pick have been rumored to be available, but I don't know if offering pick 18 versus pick 20 even changes the equation that much for that. I'm sure they will talk about that. Like, I don't think they're opposed to moving up further, but I don't know if this was with that specifically in mind. I would not be as surprised if there is some sort of specific player that they want to get at 18 that they thought Vegas at 19 was going to take if it fell to them. And but obviously they're not going to really reveal that either. So I think that is a possible reason, but they really insisted they just think this was positive value. And maybe that's just because they have so many picks already. They've picked 22 guys the last few years. They have surplus 1st, 2nd, 3rd rounders the next few years. They're only going to be able to sign so many of these prospects with the 50 contract limit. So maybe they just felt like moving up a little bit in the 1st and 2nd rounds was worth giving up a 2nd, since they're probably not going to be able to sign all these guys. But that is a perplexing one, and that's the best explanation I've got, even though it's maybe not the most satisfying.
I was telling Zach earlier today, I think that it's probably because Lou Lamoriello typically falls asleep during the summer, so he wanted to get something done with him before it was nap time for him.
Yeah, that's. I'm interested to see if the Islanders at 20, what they do at kind of the other end of it.
Yeah,
we'll see, because Lou is always interesting to follow what he's cooking up. So.
All right, Ben. Well, we're gonna wrap up here. Last question though is, we have all like the names everybody's been seeing for the draft, and you've been writing about a couple of other prospects. What is one guy that you think that fans should kind of keep an eye out when it comes to like, the 2nd round and later that potentially could be a fit for the Hawks?
Well, I wrote about Tanner Howe at the Combine, and I feel like those guys that, fit the narrative always never end up being the guys that they pick. But in terms of previewing it from advance, those kind of one of the guys that you find interesting, just in terms of he's been in Regina the last 3 years, 2 of which were with Bedard. They were good friends. They carpooled together when Bedard was there. Even this past year, they kept in touch. And he's a guy, he's probably going to be a 2nd round pick, maybe could slip to the 3rd round. He's feisty guy, kind of brings an edge. And I think that might be something the Hawks look for a little bit more this year. It sounds like Kyle's kind of interested in maybe branching out a little bit more with the types of players they're pursuing. And obviously the Bedard connection is the really interesting part of it. So I feel like Tanner Howe is a guy you can look for. But again, the odds are he's probably not going to go to the Hawks. There's a bunch of other teams in that range too. And it's kind of a needle in the haystack to predict it at that point. But he's certainly someone I'm looking at that would be cool, at least from a narrative standpoint, if they ended up getting him.
Do you see him more around that that 34th or like around that 50th if he goes in the second round? Where do you think he falls at?
It's hard to say. I think either pick, really. I mean, like Adam Guyan last year, I think we were thinking maybe one of their later seconds he would be in play. Like they were pretty interested in him all along, but they ended up springing and using the first pick in the second round on him just to make sure they got him. So I feel like once you get to the second round, it's kind of hard to know exactly the order guys are going to go. I mean, every year there's guys you think are maybe a borderline first rounder, and then you see them on the board after the first day, and kind of people are thinking that, oh, those first 10 picks of the second round will definitely go in that range, and then they ended up falling all the way down to the third round. So it just past pick 20, 25, it's so hard to predict the order, but I think in that range he would be someone they look at.
Yeah,
awesome.
Kind of makes sense. At some point you're like, I mean, we kind of wanted this guy, but you kind of got to go best player available if somebody's sliding so far.
Yeah. It's just, as I was saying earlier, it's just such an inexact science. It's so hard to predict, and it's even compared to football and basketball, where these guys are 20, 21, they played college level. When you're dealing with hockey and they're 18 or 17 and they've only been playing junior opponents for the most part, maybe freshman year of college, it's just so much harder to really get a sense of how good a guy is going to be, and also where he's going to go in the draft to how much teams value him. It's so much more of a crapshoot.
Definitely. Well, Ben, we really appreciate you joining us today, giving the insight a little bit on the draft in the off season here. What's like the best place for everybody to check out all your work and all that?
Well, you can follow me on Twitter at BenPopeCST, and also go to the Sun-Times website. Pretty much anything under the Blackhawks tab is going to be me. So either way, I mean, I tweet all of my stories typically a couple times each. So either way, you're going to find all of my work. So yeah, we appreciate any interest.
Awesome. Well, yeah, we really appreciate you joining us, and have a good couple weeks before the next 2 weeks of crazy silly season starts.
All right. Yeah, sounds good. Thanks again for having me.
Thanks for listening to the WCB Podcast. Be sure to subscribe wherever you heard this podcast. To connect with Jarom and Tanner, check out the boys at WCB Podcast on all social media. We'll see you next time.